Welcome to Tea Time with Shayleigh and Amber. I'm Shayleigh Evans, and I'm a life coach for pets and their people. I'm a truth seeker, and it's my passion to empower others and to give animals a voice along the way.
I'm Amber Lydic, and I've been a performance horse trainer focused on behavioral issues for over 20 years. My current passion is creating impactful in-person and online events and collaborating with professionals to be on the leading edge of positive change in the horse industry.
We are two friends invested in theta healing, belief system work, animal communication, and any resources that benefit human-animal partnerships. So turn up the volume and let's dive into the Great Awakening, brought to you by our horses.
Welcome to Barn Boundaries. This is one of our conversations we are having with our lovely friend, Rochelle Stanley, who is a medical intuitive. And I was inspired to have her come and talk to us because one, she's magical and she's worked with Shayleigh and I a lot. And basically, I don't know how people do life without a Rochelle. And I have said that more than many times. And also, there are so many things that people would never think of that can be a result of not setting boundaries. And that's really what I feel like Rochelle specializes in, not necessarily boundaries, but those reasons. So we wanted to have this conversation about all the things. So thank you for coming and hanging out with us.
Yeah, of course. I'm happy to be here. Boundaries are my jam. They used to not be. I was like, if you can get a good visual in your head of a doormat that said welcome, that was me. I was the doormat. So I've learned a lot from not having boundaries to feeling badly of having boundaries to I'm soaring and totally in my power because I have boundaries. And people respect me because I have boundaries. And I respect myself ultimately. Yeah.
Yeah, that's been a conversation we've been swirling around quite a bit of that idea of boundaries with yourself and honoring what you need before you can expect anyone else to honor your boundaries, which is an interesting direction to kind of go. But so talk a little bit about the beginning for you and what it was like when you did not have boundaries. Doormat, Rochelle. What was that like for Doormat, Rochelle?
Well, my middle name is Kindle and it's spelled Kindell, right? So did I put three L's in there? I don't remember how to spell this name. Isn't that funny? But I always say kind L, like people would ask how to spell it, kind L. And I came into this life to be kind. I remember I was laying in my bed and having conversations with God. I was like 5 years old. And I'm like, in my next life, I'm going to put a note in my pocket. So I remember this one. And in this life, I'm supposed to be nice. So I must have been such a villain in another life for my 5-year-old self to be like, in this life, I'm supposed to be nice. Which that was kind of like the setup for me saying yes to everyone and everything, born into a family where they nicknamed me Kinderella. I was the one that was supposed to cook and do the chores, and they'd make fun of me. Oh, here's Canderella. We're going to make her do this stuff again. And for me, I think it was a way of feeling like I have a purpose. I belong. This is how I'm loved by my family. But my mom was kind of like the worst abuser of me not having boundaries to a point of like kind of putting me in the lion's den with dangerous men and her being the reason that that was happening, which then turned into bad relationships where I didn't have boundaries and I allowed people to take advantage of me. Over time, that built into extreme resentment into my body and would start to manifest into physical conditions. And it took me being bold enough and brave enough to respect myself and honor myself to start to build healthier relationships. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Talk a little bit about how certain situations like that and certain emotions, you know, the things that come up when you're not setting boundaries, how that affects your body.
Okay. So resentment likes to hang out in certain spots of the body. And so a lot in the reproductive system. It really likes to hang out in the reproductive system. The breast, you'll start to notice kind of a fungus energy in there, which resentment and fungus vibrate at the same level. So if you're feeling a lot of resentment, you're kind of an attraction field for fungus. And breast cancer, a lot of times people say it's kind of like a fungal thing that happens in the body. So hang out in the breast and in the female reproductive system. and it can also hang out in the kidneys. And the resentment is a stewing of energy that takes a while to brew. So it starts off as first you're hurt, and you're usually hurt by someone you love, and they've had all your trust. And so we're talking before age 7, where you just fully give over your trust to someone, and something happens in that relationship that hurts, but you continue to do the same action. And then that hurt builds to a grudge. The grudge builds to resentment. And then that starts to manifest physically into the body, into different cancers or even kidney diseases, things like that. The good news is you can reverse that method, right? You can back all that stuff up when you start to understand what resentment's there to teach you in the first place, which is boundaries and respecting yourself and all that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just go a little deeper with the piece. This is what I used to not understand. And especially when I started doing theta and started like learning more, it's like an actual chemical response. Like the emotions you're experiencing, you're feeling those emotions because of different hormones and stuff in your body. So is it just like an accumulation in a certain spot of the body, and that's how that gets like stuck? I know stuck energy, and energy for me back in the day, I was like, or just energy. And I was like, no, this is like actual tangible things that are happening in your body.
So if you even just think about anger, you can feel that chemical response in your body, right? There's a trigger and you get hot and you can explode, right? So it's similar. Resentment, anger, they hold hands. Hatred, they all share a bedroom, they're friendly. So the feeling of resentment, I think maybe people might experience it different, but it's a tightening in your body. It's a holding in energy, because I would say if you're able to express yourself in a healthy way, you're not holding in resentment. So there's a tightening and there's a holding in, and you can feel it in different spots of your body. And the resentment kind of feeds energy to the body, and we think that it's giving us energy. Spiritually, in a way, it's asking you to take an action, right? Like speak up for yourself, set some boundaries, maybe leave an unhealthy relationship. So I hope I'm getting to what you're pointing me towards.
100%. Yeah, I feel like it's the build up, right? And you're like, what are you going to do with it? And then if you don't do anything with it and you stuff it back down, that's sort of like the accumulation that will cause the imbalance. Is that accurate?
Definitely. And so we're here learning through an emotional experience, I think, right? And our emotional experience is always inviting us to be expressive, but we're conditioned to not express certain things. What happens then is that emotion wants to be expressed, and it will whisper in your body, and then it will start to get louder and it will begin to scream. And that's when we've now taken an emotion and created a physical manifestation in order to finally express how we're feeling. Yeah.
I think one of the craziest things for me is, well, I've had so much fun working with you, and like I think claiming the virtues is such a cool thing, and calling your power back. And I like grew up with acne all my life, like had such bad skin, and it wasn't until I started working with you where you were like, well, it's creating a boundary over your skin, and you might not want to be seen. Like, where are areas in your life where you're not wanting to be seen? And I heard something the other day that really intrigued me, where person was like, people who have trouble setting boundaries create little white lies, like, oh, I was late to work because I got a flat tire, and that's really not the case. You just didn't wake up, and like that sort of thing happens. Do you have to identify a certain boundary, or can it just be like in general? Because I know through working with you, it's typically like a specific emotion.
I would say notice where you're triggered. If something's triggering you, there's a message in that. And a lot of times that is because you haven't set a boundary. You're not honoring yourself. You're not respecting yourself in some way. One thing we do is we obligate ourselves, which is another form of not having a boundary, right? And so it varies, but want to go deeper with that question?
Every time we talk to you, I always get like triggered in a million different directions, because you talked about resentment in the kidneys. And then I was thinking, oh my gosh, as a kid, I used to get like UTIs all the time. And I like wasn't even, I didn't know why, but through working with you, I've learned like a lot of it was resentment. And when you mentioned like if you don't have an open communication, like you're holding things inside, I don't know why I want to ask this specific thing, but so I guess when I was growing up, I actually had very strong boundaries, like with my parents. And then they started to tell me that I was rude or I was mean or I was, like I wasn't doing the right thing. And so I learned to hold all of that stuff in. And then I got nosebleeds for like years and my eardrums used to rupture as a kid. And so it makes me think, so where my mind wants to go is you're saying holding things in, but like where does that fit in if like obviously nosebleed is like not holding anything into your body.
Or
It's like
holding it until
releasing it.
you're flowed, right? I mean, if you want to go here, we can look at it. Is that what you're wanting to do?
I don't know. I don't want to take over the conversation.
Whatever. This conversation can go wherever it needs to go.
Yeah, no, it's just I always get intrigued because I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Like, well, you know me, I'm like, I get hyper focused. So as soon as you were like, oh, stuff getting held in the body, my mind immediately was like, oh, but here's all the ways that stuff wasn't held into my body. And I wonder why that was a thing and how that's affecting me now.
So, I mean, to go a little deeper in this, right? Like you held it in until your body ruptured and couldn't hold it in anymore. And I'm seeing like almost like you holding your breath and you're doing it for your family because basically they're saying you're too much, right? That's the message that you're getting is you're too much. So you stop. You stop, okay, well, this is what they need from me. And then your body's like, you can't, you can't do this. You got to let the stuff flow, right? And so I feel like you reacted in a way of love, what you thought was love, like, okay, they need me to do this. They can't handle this kind of truth yet, so I'm going to hold it in. But that's not your blueprint. Your blueprint is to flow, and your body kind of forced
Wow.
that flow.
That's so interesting and wild, and the you're too much concept, because in my work, I find that a lot of animals are guiding people into being their authentic selves. And I hear not necessarily that phrase. That phrase is actually something that I feel like I have been working to overcome in the last couple of years, where I'm like, if I am my true and authentic self, it is a very big energy, and can other people handle it? And do I have to use my inside voice? Like all of those boundaries. But I find that animals, a lot of the times, will say, well, they'll tell their people, especially aggressive animals, they become aggressive because their person is like afraid of being too much. So the animal's like, I'm going to be seen so that you don't have to be. Or Amber even put like a little poll up recently, and a lot of not wanting to set boundaries is worrying about like being rejected by others or like being too much energetically. So that's actually really interesting. That's a cool.
Yeah,
Thanks
we
for
do a
that.
lot of different things so that we're not too much, and we shut in because of that, right? Yeah, it's kind of a dangerous place to navigate life from because you're not being authentic, like you mentioned. Amber, I want to come back to something that you were mentioning about how resentment impacts the body. And I wanted to take this more to the emotional level of the breast, because so many women, this is so up. It's sad how deeply impacted the breasts are. So the resentment can build in the breast because we're taken advantage of. But what we don't understand is that we've been allowing ourselves to be taken advantage of because we haven't set a boundary. We allow ourselves to be taken advantage of because we want to be loved, we want to be accepted, we want to belong. Sometimes there's an underlining of abandonment that hangs out there and rejection. Those are kind of like the wounds that put us in the situation to be taken advantage of. Over nurturing also can cause resentment because we're giving so much and then we don't allow ourselves to receive back. And initially we think, no, we love to give. It feels so good to give. And then you get these people that want to suck on every single udder that you have. And all of a sudden you just don't have any more to give, but you've conditioned the people in your life that it's okay to suck on the udders that you don't even have, you know? And so then your breasts are like, please set a boundary. You need to give to yourself. So The other things that show up is kind of abuse, whether it's vocal, physical, emotional, sexual abuse that can get stored into the body and come out as resentment and cause some dysfunction in the body. So you want to think about how we're interacting in relationships and why we're interacting this way, especially when we don't have boundaries. What is it that we're really needing? Like, I let myself be taken advantage of because underneath it all, I really need this, which is to fit in, belong, be accepted, connected, whatever that is. And then it's going, okay, well, I can belong, especially within myself, without giving myself away. I deserve to be treated better. I deserve, to have these boundaries and have these boundaries be, respected. So that's a little bit of the pathway you want to take when you're looking at the emotional current underneath any kind of boundary issue or even a disease that's caused from lack of boundaries.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting the horse's part in all of this, where the whole reason we sort of started the podcast and the membership and everything that it's sort of evolving into is because the horses do push up against people's egos and belief systems when you hear what they actually have to say. And the interesting evolution of the horse in the role with humans, and how we've been talking about in the podcast, the Great Awakening and the animals, their bodies changing so that we can't, have this over them. But what happens is once people know that, then they have to be able to advocate for them to their trainers, to their vets, to all of the people that are still in this old mindset of this is the way horsemanship is, and they're having to now find their voice and go, no, I know it's not, and how do I express this and show up? So I think the horse's part in this is so crucial because it is who we are attracting and speaking to, but I think that's why. And people knowing the impact it can have on their actual physical body is so important, because I think the way that medicine is these days, it's like two separate things almost. It's like it doesn't integrate everything together. And I think that, pulling back on different understandings is like so helpful, because it's the horses, I feel like, inspire us and put a little fire under our ass to figure this stuff out, but also our bodies. Like, and the one significant thing that I've said a million times in lots of different places was the fact that within my marriage, I did not really use my voice, and I stayed in situations that weren't healthy. But the way that it impacted my dog that I had at the time was that she had lumps all in her mammary glands, like filled. And every time I wouldn't speak up or I would be upset and cried, she was right here. And so it kind of ties into this entire experience of the animals having these soul contracts with us. And she chose to take that on so that I could do the work. But I know very certainly that that's what that was, because I think without her, I would have ended up with breast cancer, because she took on a lot for me. And without guilt, I'm just grateful for her for doing that. But now seeing that impact and going, oh, wow, I'm very very disciplined about my boundaries now, because I'm like, wait a minute, this is way bigger than just me. And so yeah, I love this conversation. So, and I love that understanding, because it does really inject into people's like minds and hearts, like, oh wow, like this isn't just about me going, oh, I'm a little uncomfortable right now and kind of feels awkward, and oh, I don't want people to think I'm mean, when it's like, this is, your body on the line here, and it's a bigger deal. If not now, it will be in the future. So I think that's why this conversation is so important.
I love that. And to add to that, it's your soul's growing in the process, right? If we keep being meek and we keep going, no, it's okay, and let people take advantage of us, we're not really stepping into the power of our soul. And once we start to step into that power, we have this really great momentum. And I think that, your dog helping you through that process gave you some of your foundation to start to help in the way that you're helping, right? And your soul's just like got wings and flying now. Like, let me show you guys how to do this. Let me show you what's happened to me in my growth because of what I went through and what my dog taught me. I think it's really cool. Yeah.
I was
Go
just going
ahead.
to ask you about anxiety because I feel like it's such a hot potato word that people use, like, oh, I have anxiety about this or that. I don't think I've ever heard you talk about anxiety. It's like always deeper than anxiety. So, what is anxiety even real? Like, what is it? What is it in the body? Because
I think that's really a great question. I honestly, I have a lot of anxiety. And this morning I was looking at the anxiety, and my anxiety was like telling me that I was avoiding something. And so I was like, okay, what am I avoiding? And it's like going bigger. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to be seen. I like to like my moon is Cancer, right? And Cancers are in their shell. And so I'm like, I just want to be here. Don't make me. And so my anxiety is a form of resistance to what I'm actually supposed to be doing next. That's what I identified within myself, right? I think that every emotion that we're feeling that knocks us off our center is calling us towards some sort of healthy action. And if we can get in alignment with that, we're not going to feel that emotion anymore, right? So that's why Amber has been a big role in my life of like, come on, you can do it. Let's move forward. And I'm like, okay, I can do this. I'm really comfortable, like I've got my sessions and that's comfort, but to put me bigger in the world, like to be seen in my Leo sense, it's like, oh, that's intimidating. So that's my view on anxiety. I do think that it's real. Um, and I think that we can negate it if we can figure out what we're avoiding. Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. So you brought up UTIs, which I
Mhm.
wanted to elaborate on because the resentment definitely impacts that. So if you think about the bladder, it's like who or what is pissing you off, right? And so in the kidneys and the bladder, they're in healthy communication. At least we hope that they are. And so if you're struggling with bladder stuff, you do want to look at like who you're resenting and why you're resenting them, and then figure out what you're meant to learn through that resentment so you can release the responsibility from your body and start to be braver and bolder and step into those actions. For me, in my early 40s, I was starting to learn about anger because I wasn't taught that that was like a healthy emotion to have. You couldn't be kind if you had anger. And I was having like friendships and a romantic relationship that were really stimulating resentment. And my whites of my eyes were bloodshot for like 5 months, and I had UTI stuff. And I realized as I started to look at that, resentment usually is I resent this person because, and when we can get underneath it, what we realize is I resent myself because, and I resented myself because I wasn't setting those boundaries with those people. I was spending too much time in relationships that were outdated. They were just done. So I was betraying myself. I wasn't respecting myself. So it was really strongly about boundaries to help clear up that resentment in that area of my body.
The whole premise of everything we do is really rooted in we want people to know that they do have control over their experience. If we get curious about, I wonder why this is happening, what's underneath this, what does it mean, like what's bigger, and that piece of all falling back into what's good for me and how do I find enough care and love and respect for myself to be able to feel good about stating things with using our voice. And with anger, I know this past weekend I got to hang out with you, and there was somebody that we were talking with that there was anger and then rage. And I feel like a lot of people that aren't experiencing the ability to speak their boundary, they get resentful, and then it kind of doesn't grow until you're like almost explosive if you get pushed to that point where then you've got rage. And I love the conversation that we had that actually finally she was holding on so tight to it, right? Because she's like, this has protected me. I'm not letting this go. I finally found this and I can use it. And the analogy that I woke up in the morning with, because I knew she was still like, I don't know. And I said, it's the difference between walking around with a loaded gun in your pocket with the safety off versus having a gun in one pocket and the clip in the other. And like, it's, you can put, you have all the space to, if you need it, it's there, but to hold it in your body, was creating a lot of issues for her. And so even going to that, because I know that's another byproduct of not speaking your truth. Like it can come to a point where you boil over, and you were talking about the nosebleeds and the eardrums. It's like also you can kind of explode out in like a emotional situation, and boundaries at that point are not boundaries. They're usually never heard anyway. So is there anything you want to say sort of around that? Because I loved that conversation.
I love that conversation too. And I actually loved her process of like holding on to it and like defending it. It was really beautiful because you could see all the ways that it was serving her and how much she'd actually earned that right in her life. And then she just needed that final little like push of like, now you have these tools and you don't have to have it that way. But I think that there's this stuff that happens in the throat because of communication where we underexpress and then we overexpress and then we under and we over and over. And that also is building on resentment. And so if we look at what brings us to that point of overly expressing, and if we're expressing through rage, we're definitely not in our power at that point, right? We want to look at what is that rage doing for me? A lot of people think it's their power source and it's their protector, which it has been to that point. So what they're needing is to feel powerful and to know that they're protected, but through different tools. So you want to give them the better tools to have, which is how can you be in your power? What does that feel like to be in your power without that rage? Can you feel that in the cells of your body that that is possible? If you can't, what is it that you need so that you do? And go into those trauma points, which is uncomfortable. But I think a lot of people are like, you shouldn't look back, you shouldn't look back. Well, you shouldn't be stuck back there. But if you haven't learned what you're supposed to learn, you're never going to pass that from back there. So go visit that, find the good stuff, plug that into the now, and then move forward. So everything has a service. Every emotion has a service. That rage has a service. Find it so that you can let the rage go, because it's hard on the blood actually, and it's hard on the heart when you're expressing through the energy of rage. I don't want anyone to have a heart attack or a stroke because this has become their form of being heard, right? Or defending other people, like having to get rageful in order to stand up for other people. Does that answer your question? I never know because I get like on these tangents. I'm like, was I focused?
We go on tangents too, actually. So that's great. It's perfect. So we have a squirrel as our mascot. Man, that makes me think, I feel like, and I don't know if this is just me, but I don't think it is, where people will choose to be angry first because it's easier than being sad, or it feels more like so in my experience, I have worked with you a lot around resentment and rage because I lived in a childhood where my parents were very invasive and I didn't have control. And so I became very angry and very like, and still to this day, like I have been working with you because my muscles are so tight from just years of like, I feel like sometimes I'm in the body of a 90-year-old because my body has so much pain in it. And like every time we have a session, we like chip away at like little pain in my body. But why do you think, or in your experience, do you notice that people tend to choose rage over sadness? Like, is that, or anger over like feeling sad or feeling like I keep wanting to say a blue emotion, which is so weird. I think it's because that's how I communicate. Like when I think of animals, they would show me red over blue. Like they would be like, this makes me angry, or this makes me frustrated, or I am confused. And even our animals will choose that, like almost like that red energy versus like the sad, like slipping into that, I don't know, that bluish like energy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, they're communicating like that movie Inside Out. I love it.
Yeah.
But so the way I think about this, like I'm processing what you're saying, and I feel like sadness is lasting. Like I feel like people can get stuck in sadness and grief for years, for decades. Like they don't know how to process that out of their body. Where I feel like maybe the liver and the kidneys process anger and rage, like, and then done, and then done. If we're doing it right, it should process within 90 seconds. But if the trigger lasts longer than that, then, looking at the root cause of that anger and rage and finding out the virtues that you learned, and then maybe cleaning the liver a little bit. But I think that's the difference, is you move through anger and rage differently and process it better than sadness.
That's so interesting. That makes a lot of sense. Cool.
Yeah. You guys are talking about boundaries. I love that you're doing a whole class on it. I think that the better we are established in those boundaries, the healthy we are as a society, right? To give ourselves permission to have those boundaries is empowering us, and then empowering other people through an example of that, right? And one of the things you've been reflecting is that people won't feel like they're being kind if they do have boundaries. I think if we can look at that and go, you're actually not being kind to yourself by not having boundaries. It's a form of self-betrayal. If we're saying yes when we really mean no, if we're obligating ourselves, at some level we are betraying ourselves. So it's not selfish to have boundaries. It's ultimately leading us into our power. Yeah.
So I guess I'm trying to think of my boundary is like within myself. So it's not necessarily with other people.
Oh,
I
yeah.
feel like I've gotten really good about I've always been a speaker of my minder. Like I have no secrets. And I definitely offend people with how blunt that I am. But what I do notice is that I don't have good boundaries around overthinking. So like if I'm totally someone who will beat myself up about something, or I will have like a compulsive thought. And it's interesting because we did our tea house meeting, and it's that topic kind of seemed to resonate with a lot of people, maybe not to the depth that I went, because I will totally go psycho with it. But I'm curious if you can speak to like boundaries around overthinking or repetitive thoughts that aren't serving us. And I think you know me a little bit at this point, where we've been talking about my vision and you're like, look into hyper focusing. And I'm like, I am in the definition as hyper focused. Like if you go to the dictionary, that is me. So I will totally deep dive down that space, but it causes me to, so for example, the example that I used in the meeting was I got a new hoof knife. I was really excited about it. I started trimming one of my horses and I nicked her frog and it made it bleed. And I compulsively thought about it for like 48 hours. And I went through and maybe this is just my process of like going through guilt, going through like anger, going through whatever. But it's so interesting to me how far the process has to go and how it's like I can't stop myself from going there, if that makes sense.
So when you mention that, the part that stands out to me is the beating yourself up. Like that's the piece where God's like, that's the piece that needs, a little bit of tweaking. So if you look at like the pattern of beating yourself up, go back to as early as you can remember.
It's weird because a memory comes up, except I can't remember exactly what happened. I just see how old I am.
Okay. About how old are you?
Probably like 6.
So maybe what I got with what you got will help you. But it's something along the lines of, even though you told me your parents are like kind of you're too much, there's something about you needing more boundaries and they weren't there. Can you talk to me about that?
I think what probably comes to mind for me was my very first, oh yeah, I think this is it, because I grew up with a lifetime of lessons of like abusive mentors after this. So I guess I'm trying to figure out how to be concise about it. I had a trainer who was really good to me, but I exchanged like working for her for lessons, and I worked as much as I possibly could in order to be able to show. And she told me that I could, and then on the day of was like, oh no, I changed my mind. You're going to go to the show, but you're not going to participate because you didn't ride enough or whatever. And I totally did turn to my parents for support and was like, I'm devastated. Like, I tried so hard and now I'm not going to get to do it. And it was, yeah, like maybe a total lack of understanding. That's kind of what comes to mind for me. And the emotion that I had and could probably still bring up is sadness, but I would totally choose resentment over it, or anger.
So there's back to your point. That's so perfect. So then let's clean this up. So go back to that moment where you're confiding in your parents and just kind of look at them in the eyes and say, what I need right now is your compassion and your understanding. And then give that to your inner child. And let her have that right to that grief and that sadness. Now I see it processing, so it's not stuck. I hope you can feel that. And then see that you and her are in the light together. And for some reason, I'm not always called to this, but I see this image of lion's breath. So you don't have to like do it here, but you can do it in the light, you and your inner child. And then tell her that she has a right to sadness, that it's not too much. It's natural, and that she knows how to process sadness. And that she knows how to have sadness without having to have rage to protect her. And that she's allowed to have the sadness without having to build up the resentment to kind of protect the sadness, like give the sadness permission to be, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And then the two of you together with your next lion's breath in the light, you're letting that resentment out, that you lacked parental figures in your life that could be compassionate for you.
Mm-hmm.
And any resentment of like that they couldn't hold space for you, because the truth is what you learned is like how to hold space for other people, not hold their stuff, but hold space for them to process their stuff. And I can feel better flow in your heart and your throat. Let me know when you start to feel that on your end.
Mm-hmm. I could feel it.
Yeah, lion's breath is your like jam today for some reason.
Which it's actually kind of making me laugh that you say that, because I do yoga all the time and I hate doing lion's breath because it makes me gag. I'm literally like, "Ugh!" Like every time I can't do it. And it's funny that we use it, like you used it in this sense, and like energetically, I just see how it's connected to that experience, which is really, really cool. So thanks for that. That's awesome.
Awesome.
It's
Awesome.
funny too, because like I almost couldn't find them at first. Like when you were like, "Oh yeah, you need to look your parents in the eye," and you know how visual I am. Like that's my jam. And I was thinking, like, where even were they? Like, did I even ask them for help? Were they even around? Like, I don't even remember them being around or there when I was in that moment. So that was a cool process. Thanks.
You're welcome. All right. Anything else I can add or that you guys need?
I think that's good. I think that can really drive home the importance of boundaries for more than just some like catchy thing that apparently is happening on the internet lately and social media. It's like, no. And I also was sort of laying in bed this morning and I was thinking of like how many people as children are even taught about what a boundary is or that they can have them or anything. Like, and then I was like, how old was I when I even heard or understood that word? And I was like, I don't
Mhm.
know. Might have been pretty recently, actually, like not actually that long ago. So yeah, I think it's just a really important conversation to have. And I'm so excited that we got to hang out with you and have it, because I think your work is so instrumental to everything, but definitely this too, since we're talking about this.
Thank you. And you just inspired something else, if I can do a brief share.
Mhm.
We're taught to wear a mask, many different masks, especially when we're kids. Behave this way, respect this person, put on that smile. You know what I mean? The way you're behaving is wrong. And so we're constantly teaching kids that when they're expressing a boundary, it's not okay.
Mhm.
And so if you look at the kids that don't do that, they're often looked at like they're rude or they misbehave or they need to go into a special room when they're actually just expressing that they have a boundary and they're not wearing a mask. And
Right.
so if you all are raising younger kids, maybe get into the appreciation that they can't do white lies. I love that about kids. And I raised my kids that way. Like my mom would force me to hug people that I didn't want to hug, you know? And it's little things that you don't think of, but that's crossing someone's boundaries. If you're making a child do within reason something that they're not comfortable with, you're teaching them it's not okay to have boundaries, that other people are more
Mhm.
important, how other people feel are more important than your boundaries.
Yeah. And I think the majority
Yeah.
of people are raised that way, which is exactly why we're seeing this in the horse space, because it's what we're sort of teaching, hold space for the horses to express. It's good if they're expressing and they're not shut down, because physically, on a physical level, there's reasons why that's also useful. But when you're not taught that, then you don't naturally go to that, and you go to more of the way that you were raised, which is how like the horse industry basically exists, which is where this big shift is happening. So kids, horses, same.
Yeah. Puppies, I see it all the time with puppies because they get picked up against their will all the time. And there, so many puppies have invasiveness wounds. And I even like one of the animals on the Great Awakening was a little rabbit. And he's like, just because I'm small doesn't mean you can pick me up. Like I have my own personal bubble and space. And yeah, that's such a good point. Being told to smile. My sister used to make funny faces as a kid. She doesn't have a single picture smiling as a kid. And I think it's like so fun. And she doesn't have all the same physical stuff that I do. So now I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so true. My mom could never get her to do what she wanted. And I was always like the be good, get straight A's. And my sister did whatever she wanted. So that's funny.
Thank you guys. Thank you, ladies.
Yeah, thank you so much for
Thank
hanging
you.
with us.